welcome everyone. Let me make sure. Okay, so my name is Andrea. I am your moderator for today's event. COVID-19, how to minimize the impact on factory workers. This is hosted by Know Global, who collects constant well-being data from an engaged worker community to order to drive the continuous improvement. So welcome. We have an exciting program prepared for you with a panel of experts having decades of experiences in improving efficiencies of manufacturing, supply chain, and workers' well-being. We have a large group today. I think last check I had was over 180 signups, and I believe we are getting attendees as I speak. So this is awesome. To ensure a smooth program execution with such large group, we have muted your microphone. There will be a general Q&A following the panel discussion, and you are encouraged to send in your questions in advance via the Q&A function that you see on your screen. Please indicate, if possible, which panelist the question is directed to, so we'll make sure we have the right people answering your question. So let's get it started. Okay, so Marianne, let me start with you. Marianne is an award-winning entrepreneur and a thought leader in transparency. As the founder and CEO of Know Global, her vision is to humanize the supply chain through building community at the heart of every factory. She has worked with factories across Asia and at times even worked in the production line in the factory in China. She also worked previously for a B2B software company to help multinationals manage their corporate responsibility and employee engagement. She's an advocate of gender equality, and since launching her first business at the tender age of 18, raised numerous angel, government, and VC funding as an entrepreneur. So Marianne, there are many events with topics related to COVID-19 today for obvious reasons. What compelled you to hold this webinar on the workers' well-being now?
Yeah, thanks, Andy, and thanks everyone for joining today, because I know this is a really challenging time for everyone, but also important. So I just wanted to touch on today and why we're having this discussion, because what makes today different is that actually in workplaces all over the world, we're seeing how well-being and community are actually one of the most important things. And a factory is just one example of a workplace where we're seeing this is true, and workers on the factory floor are telling us that they are concerned about their well-being, both on a health, mental health and physical health. And we are also seeing more demand than ever before for community. So I want to first tell a little bit about my story, why I started Know Global, for those of you who don't already know. Because it really came from this point, like a lot of us, where we're feeling frustrated about how do we really hear what worker needs are and how do we really help respond. And so I decided to go out to the factory floor, spent the past couple of years living in China. And what I found is that it's really hard to get workers to share openly and honestly and to trust us. And it's really hard for factories to know how can they respond in the best way to what workers are saying. And it's this lack of trust between workers, factories, and brands, which means that transparency that we're all aiming for is really hard to come about. So what we've been building at Know Global is a community building program within every factory that allows workers to share on a constant basis how they're feeling and actually move us towards continuous improvement. And we want to make continuous improvement the metric for not only factories, but our whole industry, and move us towards that transparency angle as well. Bring us back to today. We want to discuss some of these topics about worker well-being in the context of COVID-19 and looking at what are workers really telling us today that might be different than before or even the same. And obviously, like a lot of us, workers in the factories are feeling extra stressed, the factories are feeling extra stressed, and for brands, obviously, it's also stressful. And so this is a really important conversation, because unless we're careful, workers will actually end up bearing a lot of the cost of this crisis, and we want to avoid that from happening. Not only because it protects workers, but because it protects us too. And the interesting thing about today as well is that we are having a direct impact on workers, and workers are having a direct impact on us through the crisis. For example, we need to make sure that all of these products that we are relying on throughout this crisis can actually be made by people who are protected and in a healthy way behind the supply chain. And also, we're not currently aware of all of the ways in which the virus could remain on surfaces, but we are seeing a lot of consumers worried about bringing products into their home that are either potentially at risk of being touched or made by people who have been in risk of having the virus. And so actually making sure precautions are in place, or that the people who make our products are protected, is actually really important. And so that's why today, more than ever, we can actually take this conversation about worker well-being outside of corporate responsibility and make it about actually business critical and business sustaining at this time. And I want to make our focus today as well about how we actually help factories sustain and get through this time, and how we help them to rebuild. Because it's these factories that are committed to getting through this time that we need to help support and make sure their workers also get through this time. So I want to also make today and our conversation about solutions and the positive change that we also might be able to see as a result of this. Because actually I think today there is an opportunity for change, and many of the things that we've always wanted to happen in a wellbeing context actually are needed more than ever. And thinking about actually how supply chains could look after COVID-19, we could actually be in a better position worker wellbeing wise than before. So I want to ask some of these kind of challenging questions also back to the panel. I want you to also challenge us all, ask your questions in the forum, and let's all take away something new as a result of today's conversation, and really take some action. So thank you to all speakers for joining, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Well, Marianne, that's great. You mentioned in your opening remarks a number of times about trust. I think that has to be the basis of all actions and relationships, and especially in this time where we are being, we are in war. A lot of people talk about being in war with an invisible enemy like the coronavirus. When we talk about well-being of employees, we always think about safety. We think about, whether it's chemical, whether it is a work fire hazard, these type of things. But I think the current situation tells us, going forward, we need to also protect the employees against the infectious disease that would be coming on their way, and in a significant way, as we have seen. So I know you have a lot of experience in interacting with the workers themselves, but our next guest, who will join us, Cherry Lin. She's a manager responsible for the HERproject within BSR, or Business for Social Responsibility. BSR is a global thought leader informed through field work and local implementations, enables them to work with members of companies, member companies, to create innovative, sustainable solutions and globalize the sustainability dialogue. Cherry manages implementation of HERproject within BSR, a factory-based initiative focused on improving health and awareness of female workers in South China. Since the inception in 2007, HERproject has worked in more than 850 workplaces across 14 countries and has increased the well-being, confidence, and economic potential of more than 1 million women and 450,000 men. Wow, that's impressive. So Cherry, how is the COVID impacting the workers, particularly women, who in many societies believe less privileged than men in many ways? what are workers saying and what are their needs, Cherry?
Thanks, Andreas. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be connected here. I'm Cherry from BSR China, and as Andreas introduced, I manage HERproject and women empowerment programs in China and some other Asian countries. I'm happy to share, based on our observations, how COVID-19 is impacting on workers, particularly the women workers at the bottom of the global supply chain. Before responding to Andrea's question, just add a little bit of overview of HERproject very briefly. As Andrea's has already introduced about HERproject, basically we empower women workers in global supply chain. We focus on their health, their financial inclusions, and the positive gender relationships, which are all very critical for women empowerment, and particularly true in this pandemic crisis period. So Andreas, can you go to the next slide? So this is where we work. We are currently active in 9 countries in Asia and East Africa as the world's largest workplace-based program right now. HERproject covered various industries, including ICT, apparel, textile, footwear, fashion, beauty, etc., etc. And one thing to note is that in East Africa, we work a lot in the agriculture sector and reached the tea and cotton farms there. So in each HERproject country, we work with the local implementing partner. And through our implementing partner, our network directly outreach to the suppliers and women workers in every HERproject country, which in this pandemic period provides us the first-hand and field-based information directly from the factories and the workers, especially the women workers who occupy the majority of the workforce in the global supply chain. So generally, the workers are now confronted with 2 biggest challenges brought by COVID-19. The first is the risk of falling into poverty, or even we say extreme poverty, which is already happening to thousands of workers right now. We all know that buyers, they halted the production in the supply chain, which has caused great risks to the operation or even survival of the suppliers. And of course, workers are directly impacted by this. So, the keywords that we heard in the regards of the workers from each HERproject country are like furlough, layoff, not being properly paid, strikes, violence, despair, etc., etc. It's also, of course, easy for us to understand that if workers lose their jobs, they will lose their only income that put food on their table, not only for themselves, but also for each family stand behind them. So we have, in HERproject countries, we have seen a huge number of workers in India and Bangladesh returning home on foot without any savings, or just a very little savings. In East Africa, women workers told our implementing partner that they really worried that they don't have enough food for their family and for their kids. And in Myanmar, we also see the worker strikes, violence happening for the same reasons. So it's happening basically everywhere in supply chain incentive countries. This is the first biggest challenge faced by the workers. And another biggest challenge for workers is the health crisis. Of course, the pandemic is a global health crisis, but the impact on the workers, especially the women workers, are even more catastrophic. Due to the poor hygiene conditions, specifically the lack of cleaning water, the running water with sanitation products, no matter for workers who are still staying at the factories or those who have returned home, they are exposed to great risk of getting infection. And because of their very vulnerable financial situation right now, they can hardly afford any medicines or treatment. It's already impacting millions of workers right now. And besides all of these 2 biggest challenges, and one more thing to note is that COVID-19 is having a major and differentiated impact on women, which means women are faced with additional challenges besides what's above mentioned. First and foremost, we have been concerned about increased domestic violence against women because of the stress because of the woman's vulnerability. The United Nations have already reported on this. And one example is that the police cases of domestic violence against women have already doubled in China during the lockdown period. Besides that, we also have seen increased unpaid care work because with the shutting down of the schools, and women are primarily responsible for this burden in childcare and family responsibilities, which can do harm to women's physical health and mental health. And also be mindful that women are also in the risk of being left behind in technology-oriented jobs. We all know that the current crisis is accelerating the use of technology for work, but women is the group with least knowledge and the stereotype, and also with the stereotypes of social norms. Women are very much more likely to be excluded from these opportunities. So for the interest of time, let me put it into summary here. COVID-19 is obviously having a very profound and desperate impact on the workers in the global supply chain, and women workers are definitely the group that is most impacted.
Well, Carrie, that's very compelling message. We hear about on the news all the time about the impact of coronavirus in human lives, but also business and so forth. But one of the most significant thing about this situation, which I think all of us are experiencing for the first time in our lives, last major global pandemic was in the early 1900s. So, the speed and the magnitude in which that this pandemic has spread throughout the world and impacting hundreds of millions, if not billion people, is just catastrophic. But the worst thing about this is that this is not the first, and this is not the last. There would be more like this, and the member of the very disadvantaged part of the society is going to take on the burden of the most of this issue. So, speaking more onto the specific in the business side, what do you suggest, and the buyers, the customers that goes to these factories and place orders to do at this point in time to help the workers, in your case specifically about women workers?
Great question, Andrea. I believe that buyers definitely have a very important role to play to help to contribute. Firstly, I believe first of all, it's very important for buyers to honor the contract. We all have heard of the cases of canceling the contract or not honoring the contract. Buyers, they did not pay for the orders completed or in production, and buyers did not include this item as one of the priority agenda during this crisis. And the result is, without the money, the fee-margined factories are not able to pay the compensation to workers properly, which is a very easily to understand rationale behind it. And secondly, we also learned that in quite several Asian countries, that digital wage is becoming more and more important. In the past, it's considered to be a plus, but right now it becomes kind of a must during this pandemic. Governments in several Asian countries have officially called out to push for digital wage. And we also received, for HERproject, we also received a lot of interest and requests about wage digitalization. So one thing that we have done is we also share with our brand network the HERfinance digital wage tech tool that we developed in Cambodia, Bangladesh, and Egypt, which have already been proved to be very supportive to the workers and the factories. And definitely, I think brands can also work more on this digital wage. And another thing that I think brands can also consider is not only in the short term, but also in the long term, is the knowledge distribution. How do we get the knowledge to workers under the pandemic period and also after the post-pandemic period? The normal ways of passing knowledge might not work, and we should also put the knowledge in a easily understandable and easily accessible way. For example, like one thing that we are considering through HERproject is we want to draw the key messages on health, digital wage, or positive gender relationships, and we aim to digitalize them to address women workers and their families' immediate needs during the crisis. And we strongly to encourage the brands to think about this and to join this or to participate in this knowledge distribution, the new innovative way of knowledge distribution. And also one final suggestion from me for the brands is I think getting involved in a global network is something that buyers might want to do and can definitely be beneficial for buyers to learn the best practices and communicate with peers in supporting women workers. BSR, I mean, we are also coordinating the response through Empower at Work collaborative, together with Better Work, Care, Young Women, etc. All of these stakeholders who are also working on the workers and women workers. And we share the coordinated message with our brand network, as we believe that buyers are really in a need to be involved in a global network during this global crisis.
Well, Cherry, that's the great feedback and input from your experience as well from the workers the women workers that you deal with. You know, your suggestion of paying for the outstanding orders, and we already saw in the newspaper about some brands helping some of the factories to pay for their workers during this period of pandemic, and their brands were not paying for it. So we heard both stories. Investment in digitalization, knowledge distribution, the things you have mentioned, they're all good ideas, but it requires a lot of investment and not money, right? So speaking of the buyers, that leads us to the next speaker. Paul Lennon. Paul is the managing director of Asia for Weave. Weave is the supply chain consulting services and capability building firm. Paul has led supply chain strategy and transformation program across the small, medium, and large organizations across the Asia Pacific region, including Kmart Australia. Paul also has advisory role for 2 NGOs based in Hanoi, Vietnam, one providing empowerment programs and other social enterprise. So Paul, we heard from Cherry the what she's hearing from the workers, what she suggests that the buyers or the factory management needs to consider. But you having the extensive experience with both the buyer side, the retailer, and the manufacturer, how is the retailer-manufacturer relationship being impacted by the apparel industry?
Thank you, Andreas, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in this really important discussion topic. The relationship between the retailer and the manufacturer has always been a strategically important relationship and a really critical relationship, and more so than ever right at the minute because things are changing so rapidly. And in the context of this conversation, the objective is really we want businesses to protect themselves and we want businesses to ensure people have jobs at the end of the coronavirus pandemic. So within that context, if we think about the relationship, I wouldn't mind just talking about 3 phases. The first phase, if we go back to January, when the virus became known globally, albeit still a virus contained within Wuhan, during that period, if we talk about the apparel industry, retailers at that point in time became concerned about the factories in China closing. And as a consequence, the discussion and the relationship in that point in time was all about, can I get my orders? Can you expedite my orders? Can you get them onto a vessel and ship them very quickly? And where possible, can you increase the orders? Now, if you fast forward to March, which is the second phase, of course, the virus has become a global issue and a global pandemic. And if you go back to customers around the world, and if we refer to North America again as an example, At that point in time in March, retailers started to realise that stores would have to close, that social distancing rules would come into place, and as a consequence, they needed to start rethinking how they were going to manage their business, and naturally that meant reducing their sales forecasts, closing stores. And so the relationship between the retailer and manufacturer shifted. It shifted a full 180 degrees. So within the space of 3 months, the relationship went from being, we need more inventory and can you produce it quickly and ship it quickly, to can you stop the orders, we need to cancel the orders. And the position for both entities, for both businesses, was cash preservation. I really need to preserve my cash in order to ensure I can survive the next 3, 6 or 9 months. You know, something that's relatively unknown is the duration for which it will last. And cash preservation means a few things. It means renegotiating the orders, renegotiating the payment terms, deep discounts in the retail stores. So they're all topics that are very, very stressful and very, very challenging to make. Now that leads us to the third phase, which we're yet to embark on. But at some point in time, we will recover from the virus and consumers will regain confidence. The rules around social distancing and travel will be removed. And naturally, the economy will rebuild. And as you can imagine, the relationship between the two parties at this point in time is going to change 180 degrees all over again. And both parties will move from wanting to preserve their cash to invest their cash and work out the best way to build inventory, get it back into their stores and start selling it again. So we refer to this constant shift in supply and demand as the bullwhip effect. And the bullwhip effect is effectively when supply and demand gets out of sync. And supply and demand are never perfectly in sync. And to be honest, it's one of the most talked about topics between a retailer and a manufacturer. How can we get alignment between what the consumer wants and what we're making? But at the moment, the bullwhip effect is probably as extreme as it's been in quite a long time. And naturally, the more the bullwhip effect is at play, the more a business becomes compromised and the more risk a business has of not producing the results that it has the potential to produce. So when we think about the relationship as it stands at the minute, it's probably never been more important for the retailer and manufacturer to be working together and helping each other through this. And it's no surprise they both have the same objective, and that objective is to service an end consumer as effectively and as efficiently as possible. So I hope that answers your question.
Well, that's really interesting. I really like the term the bullwhip effect. I think, you know, you're exactly right. This whole pandemic crisis impacted businesses in the supply side, and everybody were concerned only a few weeks ago about, you know, having enough supplies and getting the orders fulfilled. And then it quickly turned into a demand side problem where orders are being canceled and there's uncertainty about even future orders. And at a certain point in time, I do like your optimistic message that we will get back to the supply side issue because we really do need to get to that back to that side of the problem. But I think what we want to do is we want to go back to that side of the problem, but much better than when we went into this problem with the pandemic. Okay, and I think that's the most important thing. We are going to have, unfortunately, crisis like this in business, in industry, either large and small. But every time we're faced with problems, I think we need to look at, well, how can I be better when we come out of this problem than the when I went into it? Okay, so you know, your opinion, Paul, you know, just a follow-up question for you is that how can, you know, the brands or retailers, the factories, or even workers can minimize the impact, in your opinion, about due to this pandemic, and how can they prepare? You know, we're not certainly out of this yet, so how can they prepare to rebuild the factories better than they went into this problem.
Yeah, I thought, okay, so what I might do is just paint a little bit of context before providing an answer to your question. And the context I want to provide, that I use this analogy quite frequently because I don't believe a lot of people appreciate the tough task that a manufacturer has or a retailer has. It's extremely challenging. Both of them are extremely challenging businesses. And so the analogy I like to use is, and I'll use retail as an example first. Retailers, let's say a small to medium-sized retailer might have 200 stores in one country, and they might range, let's just say 5,000 different lines. Okay, so when we're thinking about 5,000 lines and 200 stores, that is actually 1 million different combinations. And by combinations, I mean that's 1 million unique decisions that needs to be made. And depending on the maturity of the retailer, those very mature retailers that are digitally enabled can be reviewing those 1 million decision points daily or weekly, quite frequently, where others that are less mature and perhaps don't have the same technology, they may not get to review that within 3 to 6 months, perhaps. Now, if you go to the other end of the spectrum, the manufacturer, they have an equally challenging task ahead of them. And whilst they don't have the store network, they have an extremely complicated sourcing and procurement exercise to pull together all the little bits and pieces that go into the production process in creating products for end users. So both organizations have extremely complicated jobs, and we're asking them to come together and help each other more efficiently manage the end-to-end supply chain. So what they can do, I think it's the old aeroplane analogy where you've got to put the mask on yourself first. So the first thing is businesses need to invest at becoming mature organizations through investment in their systems and their people and their processes. And to add to that, they need to really invest in having a very clear strategy. And once they have those things in place, it then becomes easier to partner with your upstream and downstream supply chain partners, because you want to share your vision with your partners. You want to share your strategy with your partners. You want to help them get aligned with your ways of working. And you want to start getting commonality in the use of technology. You want to get commonality in the use of the processes being applied. And you want to build extended team relationships between the two parties. So that's where you have to start, I figure. And to just give you some practical examples around what companies can do today, well, manufacturers at the minute who I'm talking to, the main thing they want is just visibility of the forecast, of the retail forecast. And for the retailers, that's not an easy question to answer. It's a very challenging question to answer, but having a forecast, albeit not the most accurate, is better than not having a forecast. So keeping the communication open and being as transparent as both parties can in what they're foreseeing the demand to be over the next 3 to 6 months is certainly the hot topic at the minute. And if you fast forward to that period of optimism where we ramp up, it switches. And at that point, the retailer will want to see more from the manufacturer. They want to know the manufacturer's capacity plans, their production plans, and their ability to manage orders that are coming through at that point in time. So, once again, both parties are very aligned, and I think the more that they can align and connect, the less impact there'll be on businesses and the less impact there'll be on workers' jobs.
Right. Well, Paul, that's great. If I summarize what you have shared as a proposed actions or solution in this time of crisis, where actually is dividing up people, right? Retailers are doing their own thing, or manufacturers doing their own thing, or are trying to for their various reasons. That could be looked upon by each other as a negative or not something that they like canceling orders, not paying for it, or or others. So, but what you're suggesting is actually they work even closer together in this time of crisis, and prepare to work together and share information, create transparencies, integrate systems, find a ways to be more close to each other in a working environment, such that they can address this bigger problem that is faced by all of us. I think that having had some years of experience in apparel industry in my previous job, I certainly agree to what you have said. But I know in the audience we have people from other industries as well, in telecoms, automotive, and others. And I think it brings to our next guest, Jeremy Prepscius. Jeremy is the Vice President of Asia Pacific at BSR. He has enormous amount of experience in the various different industries. So he is the perfect person to kind of broaden our topics and answers to other industries. Jeremy is in charge of serving and expanding the BSR member space in Asia and integrating their work into their global approach. Members include Amazon, Facebook, Google, Coca-Cola, Disney, and Walmart. Jeremy has extensive experience, as I mentioned, in supply chain management, business integration, external communication, government relations, and compliance operations. Prior to joining BSR in 2006, he spent more than 10 years in equipment sourcing, footwear production, corporate responsibility for Nike. He also worked in China for 5 years as a North Asia regional compliance director, covering sustainability issues throughout Asia. So Jeremy, welcome. So as you work with the various industries within BSR that are impacted by COVID-19, what are your key insights on how should we help and prepare the factories to rebuild?
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to share, and I'm going to add to that. And how do we minimize the impact of COVID-19 on workers in our global supply chains? So what we've heard in this conversation so far, I take away is a couple of really important pieces. And one, we heard from Cherry, there is direct, real human, and at times absolutely critical impact on workers, particularly the most at-risk workers in our supply chain. Those most at risk can be in countries with very poor social safety nets. Most at risk could be in some industries, migrant workers that are living far from home. Or as Cherry's shown, how women in particular can be affected by this crisis. And as we think about this, talking a little bit about the preserve cash and the invest cash elements, as we think about what can we do, Cherry's pointed to some of the very specific things that you can do right now in your supply chain, right? And first and foremost is honor your contracts, right? There is, in human rights terminology, cause, contribute, linked. You don't want to cause direct impact on workers, right? And as you've heard, and as you know, like the impacts on some of these workers is absolutely critical. You may also be thinking about, in this preserve cash time, are there opportunities for industries to come together to talk to governments, national governments, and maybe aid agencies looking for support payments or other opportunities to provide actual cash benefits to workers in some of these countries. The other one that's already been talked about is how do we extend knowledge, access, and use the resources of the factories themselves to enable and preserve factory situations and conditions and workers, right? And so how do we connect these to workers, to families, and to communities? Well, one thing that's already been talked about, absolutely clear, is how do you pay workers in Bangladesh after they've gone walking home? Well, wage digitization is the answer, right? Cambodia and Bangladeshi governments have recognized that and are trying to digitize a lot of the garment workplaces, particularly. How do we provide knowledge and access to workers themselves today when it comes to some of the health impacts and risks and best practices for them be it hand washing or other things. And here again, there are local community organizations in the BSR term, that many of those are community partners. There are digital tools that we and others investing in. And there are the relationships that you buyers have with your factories to make these materials available and pass through. How do we use factory systems themselves, right? So what are the best practices for screening of workers, for safe distances, for hand washing facilities? You have HSE managers in factories, you should know them, right? You have maybe clinics and doctors and nurses in factories, you should have access to those, right? How do we engage those? How do we utilize the systems that are there? And then something that has also been talked about is as you build the relationship with the factories, how do you think about building lifelines and triaging, particularly for those factories, groups, products that are going to be most important to your rebuilding? What does your tier 2 look like? What do their tier 2 kind of suppliers or finishers or sub-manufacturers look like? How have you mapped that out, and how are you thinking about that? Because those are the things that, as you have that knowledge, that allows us to then think about, okay, it's going to be time to invest. And there's not going to be an exact break point in invest. This is going to be shifting and changing, and I bet you over time it'll be shifting and changing quite a bit by country, where some countries, Vietnam, may be back much quicker than anybody expects. There are also broader trends that we all know and we all see that exist in the supply chain universe that have been going on for years, right? So you know supply chains are moving. They have been moving. They continue to move outside of China. It's going to continue. Maybe accelerate. We'll see. Automation was brought up in one of the comments to us and questions. Digitization, which means talented workforces. How do you find and retain those? And then how do we think about tech transparency? And all of this is going to be linked back ultimately to consumers. So 5 things you can do to think about the rebuild side. 1, let's plan through business continuity plans, scenarios, and community engagement. The COVID crisis is itself unique, but we have had every couple years significant issues around supply chain manufacturing countries around Asia. Whether it's been super typhoons, whether it's been tsunamis, et cetera, there will be other issues that come through. And as we think about this, maybe one of the key learnings from the COVID crisis, let's specifically think about, understand, and plan for those who are most at risk, those who have the least ability to help themselves, the workers in some of our supply chains. Can we set targets and knowledge or action that you expect to take and grow as you invest? What could those be? What those targets? You can actually invest in the worker resilience of your partners. Digital wages been already talked about. Let's get digital, right? Digital knowledge. You can go through and set targets about wage digitalization within your global supply chain, of worker access to knowledge, of opportunities for worker development, access to resources. How do we think about inclusion, particularly as jobs come back? Are certain groups going to be excluded or not? How do we invest in skills building and capacity building? Third, already talked about, invest in factory systems to build industry resilience. Turns out we actually have all these clinics and doctors all over the places that could be doing health surveillance. They're in your clinics of your supply chain. How do we invest in them? Or the health and safety systems of the factories? 4th thing, reprice risk. As you're thinking about your supply chain, how do you connect the business continuity planning, the situations that you're thinking about, and actually the risk associated with, where does my supply chain sit? What does this mean for me? What's my risk premium? And finally, also for the people on this call, invest in your own staff here in your sourcing country who are engaging with the factories. Help them to understand, be safe, of course, grow and build, because the world is shifting, right? Those staff become even more critical for the future.
Well, Jeremy, that's very good answer to my question. I wrote this down. Business continuity, digital knowledge, industrial resilience, reprice risk, and invest in the staff. Okay, I think those are very good guidelines for everyone to take a look. And I'm checking on the time, and we are a bit running late, so I'm going to now turn it back over to Marianne, because here, you know, as Jeremy mentioned, the last thing, invest in people. So at the end of the day, we can succeed in business only through our people. We are only good as our people. So, you know, the No Global collects and reports on continuous stream of data from workers themselves on wellness. What are the workers saying about the virus and how they're impacting them today? How should we support and invest in these workers, as Jeremy said, in one of the 5 things that we should be doing?
Yeah, it's a good point, because I think throughout all of this, it's often a struggle to hear directly from workers. But similar to what Paul was saying earlier, we've seen a few distinct phases that workers have gone through during the different changes in the virus as well. So initially, when the virus hit, was around the end of Chinese New Year, in terms of global media coverage. And this is actually normally when labor turnover in a factory is at its highest. But actually, we saw labor turnover was at its lowest ever, because obviously workers were worried about actually getting back to the factories or getting paid or having their job cut. So they actually wanted to go back to the factory. We even had factories try to incentivize workers to come back and offer them larger paychecks. And a second phase we saw actually now, in terms of now the impact on Western demand and cutting orders, is actually, you might be surprised to hear that in some factories, workers are doing more overtime than before. And this is a particular strategy where some factories are trying to actually fulfill orders before they get cut. So some workers are actually working longer hours than before, and that's obviously having its toll. A major impact for workers, obviously, it's been covered in the media recently, is the pay issue. We've had workers directly report to us through our grievance channel. We're in constant connection with workers through our online communication using WeChat. So we have hundreds of workers within a forum where we're getting live responses to our weekly surveys, but also actually one-on-one communication. So we were aware a few weeks ago of workers leaving factories or threatening to leave factories based on not getting their pay on time. And this was also even before the kind of Western demand hit. So there's a range of factors which are really impacting workers on a daily basis. And what we'd say is key is obviously keeping in communication, making sure everybody's actually finding out in as real-time basis as possible what's happening on both ends, right, on all sides of the conversation. And so we're actually really encouraging communication at this time, connection and social. Even whilst workers have been away from the factory or it's been uncertain about them being able to socialize, we found there's been a real need, like in every workplace, to have online activities, online communication in place to help tell the workers also what's happening. I won't take up much more time because I know we wanted to leave some time for questions as well. Back to you, Andy.
Well, Marianne, that's great. I mean, you know, with the drop in demand, you would think that the workers are, idle in the factories. In March, we only talked about how China is going to get back onto the level of production level, right? The workers returning to the factory was a big issue, and so on and so forth. Now the workers, we would think that with the drop in demands and canceling orders, they would actually have nothing to do while in the factory. But hearing that they're actually working overtime so that they can fulfill the orders they already have and give a better chance of getting the orders paid from the retailers and brands. That's quite interesting. So thank you very much, panelists. You have shared, I think, very insightful information for the audience. I've been taking a lot of notes, and I hope the other attendees have done so also. But now I want to turn to the questions from the audience, and try to have some of those questions answered by our panelists. Again, I doubt, I see, we have at one time over 110 participants, and now we have set of questions. I don't think we're going to go through all the questions within time, but if we don't go through your questions, we will try to answer them after the event and provide the feedback to you. So I'd like to ask Qingyi, our Chief Product Officer, who's responsible for the product development and implementation of our No Global solution. Qingyi, is there any questions on the list that catches your eye that you want to maybe pose to the panelists?
Yes. So we have 8 questions in total, and then let's address the first 2 questions. I think we're asking the same thing. So a question from Bernardo Scamaca. What are the best preventive measures that the factory are implementing to protect the workers during COVID emergency? Would any panelists like to take this question?
I can take because through HERproject we have been working directly with a lot of factories and brands, and especially on the measures taken to protect the workers during this emergency, especially for the migrant workers. And actually, there has been a lot of very good suggestions shared, including, first of all, of course, enhancing the safety and health in the workplace. That can include, like, adopt or adapt existing occupational safety and health measures in the workplace, and strictly follow the health authority guidelines to limit the risk of infection, and providing enough hand sanitizer or sanitizer stations in all of the toilets, health clinic facilities, or in all of the entrances, meeting areas, etc., etc. And also make sure that you have sufficient supply of hand sanitizer, masks, gloves, or PPE in your workplace. And also a lot of the factories in China we have seen, and also right now in the Asian countries that we have observed in HERproject countries, consider the temperature screening for workers at all of the entrances, and also disseminate information about COVID-19 prevention, which HERproject is also doing a lot in collecting and distributing those COVID-19 prevention knowledge to the factories. And also another thing that factories can do is about the stress and anxiety management about the workers. And we know that there are a lot of fear, anxiety, stress related with the workers when they are facing about this infection. So one of the best practices from the employers, from the suppliers, can also communicate with the workers and understand their stress and try to mitigate the stress by combating rumors, because we have heard a lot of rumors in a lot of the factories, and the spread of disinformation or false information. And also one thing that a lot of the factories or organizations are also doing is adapting the work arrangements to allow for flexible work hours, and also taking, as I also mentioned about the family responsibilities, taking the woman's family responsibility or childcare burden into consideration and allow for more flexibility of the workers. And for the workers living in the dormitories, and maybe for a better social distancing, rearrange the dormitory allocation. And I don't want to speak all of the details, but there are definitely a lot of very detailed implementations or measures can be taken by the suppliers to support the workers during the COVID emergency. And those are really preventive measures.
Okay, so great. Qingyi, we may have just one more question that we could maybe answer. So can you ask the next question, please?
There is a question relating to how do we make sure the manufacturer's attention is on CSR? Also from Bernardo. So the question is what we as customers can do to keep the CSR attention in the factories. Most of these factories are recovering their business, and they may give priority to the business than CSR. Any takers for this question?
I'll just add the traditional response to this, which is, as Paul said, build relationships. This relationship is the factory should be sharing your same values set. That's why that they should be your factory to some degree, as well as quality, delivery, and price. You as the buyer, ability to talk to and engage and set expectations with the factory, to work with others in your industry to have the same results, and then also to be aware of other potentially problematic issues, right? So if jobs are scarce and factories rehire fewer people, who gets rehired and why? And does that exclude certain people? Does that exclude women from the workforce? Or is it the other way around? So your awareness and engagement and the continued dialogue is fundamental, not just to sustainability, but to the long-term relationship and, I would argue, business success between you and your supplier.
Well, if I may add, I wouldn't count the doing business is necessarily exclusive of the workers' well-being or working on a CSR topic. I think doing a good business requires that good CSR practice, good workers' well-being in order for you to continue. Okay, so we are about out of time, I believe. Okay, or they passed our time, and I appreciate everyone still staying on for a question. Maybe we'll take one more question. I think, you know, if you guys are willing to stay on, I see 90 people. Maybe we'll take one more question, Chingy, or one other question from the audience.
Yes, one more question. From Mega Kapoor, factories are expected to operate at less capacity when they open up. So if they decide to operate at 30% considering social distancing, how can they decide which 30% workers they will call for work? Will that not be discriminatory if they call some and not the rest? Jeremy, please. Thank you.
Jeremy?
Well, so it is discriminatory if you say we will only rehire, I don't know, this type of person with this gender at this point in time who has to be X age. That's discriminatory, right? It should be like all other hiring. And I would assume most of you would have worked through kind of discrimination within hiring practices, within your code and supply chain practices. You know, job selection and advertising is non-discriminatory practices are generally global at this point in time. So factories should rehire based on desired skill sets. We need cutting and sewing, and we need, you know, sole laying or whatever it may be, based on quantifiable criteria that are not discriminatory. I mean, that's kind of basic HR the way it would exist today. So I don't see that as a big difference. I think that there will be opportunities for abuse. I think that will happen, right? And I think that engaging suppliers on expectations is an important thing.
Okay, great, Jeremy. Thanks for the answer.
Sorry, just one point, adding to the communication with workers when they are not in full capacity, because we've seen strikes and violence happening in Myanmar because of lack of communication between the factory management and workers for the same thing, like they're reducing their capacity and workers cannot work, only part of the workers can't work and the others can, you know, but there's no proper communications and the decision is just send notifications to the workers. There's not a way of recall communication, so that can cause a problem. Just add a note of this.
Okay, thanks, Sherry, for the last remark. So that's a wrap. Thanks all for attending. I hope you enjoyed the event today and received some valuable insights from the panel of experts. At the same time, it is obvious that we did not have sufficient time to discuss the topic fully or address all your questions. I list here the contact information of experts for your reference. We encourage you to get in contact with them to arrange for more in-depth discussion and introduction of solutions they can offer to your company. So thank you very much. As I always say, at this point in time, take care and be safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
guys, for the panel.
Thank you.
Great,
Thank you.
great event.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.